Welcome to the AOA Future in Orthopedic Surgery podcast series. This AOA podcast series will focus on the future in orthopedic surgery and the impact on leaders in our profession. These podcasts will focus on the vast spectrum of change that will occur as the future reveals itself. We will consider changes as they occur in the domains of culture, employment, technology, scope of practice, compensation, and other areas. My name is Doug Lundy, host for this podcast series. Joining us today is Dr. Mike Archdeacon. Dr. Archdeacon is the Peter J. Stern Professor and Chairman of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. He serves as the Medical Director of Operative Services and the Director of the Division of Musculoskeletal Traumatology at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. He's board certified by the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery and specializes in difficult fracture care. Dr. Archdeacon attended Tulane University School of Engineering and then obtained his bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering. He then attended the Ohio State University College of Medicine, where he received his MD. Then he also obtained an MS in biomedical engineering at the Ohio State University College before he completed a general surgery internship and Allen Orthopedic Surgical Research Fellowship. After completing his residency training in orthopedic surgery at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, he obtained fellowship training in orthopedic traumatology at Tampa General Hospital. He joined the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at the University of Cincinnati in 2001. Dr. Archdeacon served as the 37th president of the Orthopedic Trauma Association. He served on the Mid-America Orthopedic Association, and as well as the executive board of the Ohio Orthopedic Society. He is currently serving as the publications chairman on the Critical Issues Committee of the American Orthopedic Association. And today we're going to discuss Dr. Archdeacon's leadership lessons as his position as a tenured chairman. So, Dr. Archdeacon, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hi, Doug. Thanks for the invitation.
And Mike, you and I have known each other for quite a while through our capacity in many places in the AOA and the Trauma Association and such. Can you just, I gave some of your bio there. Any other thoughts of, you have bigger role too at Cincinnati too, don't you?
Currently, for the last 4.5 years, have served as a Senior Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs and then the CEO of UC Physicians Practice Plan.
That's fantastic. That's a lot of work. Are you able to get much work as a practicing trauma surgeon, or how does that work?
So I operate on Tuesdays and I see patients on Friday, and I still take call usually about 4 to 6 nights a month on average.
Wow.
And when a partner's out of town, I'll pick up an OR day to cover trauma rooms for them. So somewhere usually I'll hopefully have a week where I'll operate 2 days a week, once or twice a month also.
And how long have you served as chair there?
12.5 years.
Okay, that certainly counts as tenured. All right, and before we get too far into this, we also have the chair forum at the AOA annual meeting, and you helped co-lead one of the discussions this year during the forum. Can you tell us more about the chair forum at the AOA and why that's of value to chair people across the country?
Yeah, so first, I just want to applaud the AOA for putting that together. I think it's probably been about 4, maybe 5 years now. It's the idea of getting chair people together to talk and to be able to talk candidly about the issues we face, not just the operational issues we face, but also the stresses of the role and how you deal with some of the difficult situations you encounter, how you deal with difficult conversations with partners and those kind of things. I think it's just nice to have a venue where you can be amongst peers and you can really have open and candid conversations. And that forum has really allowed that. So I really applaud the AOA for bringing that back, supporting it, and encouraging others to participate.
And that forum is exclusive to folks who are currently in a chair role, but there's also a vice chair forum too.
There is.
And what do you know about that?
I haven't been involved with that one technically, but my understanding is it's very similar, with the idea of, again, having a group of peers that are facing similar issues. I think the one caveat, the slight difference is there's also some time devoted to whether or not the person aspires to move into the chair role and what some of the differences between a vice chair and a chair role might be, commitment-wise, time-wise, the qualifications and skills that you might want to work on and things like that. So I think it serves a dual purpose in that environment. But I personally haven't participated. So that's my understanding, not from direct involvement.
Tell us what you think or your story of how you were selected to become chair. I know you're in a very storied department with Dr. Stern, who's well known to all of us, and how all that kind of came about.
So I think I would say my leadership journey has been a series of opportunities. And I don't think I had the goals of having the jobs that I currently have when I started in medical school or in residency or in practice, even. I think they've evolved over time. But I was fortunate that in my department, there was not a huge interest in serving as a division director for my division. So after a couple of years, Dr. Stern asked me to serve in that capacity. And then there was a series of steps, like most of us, that opened a door. I got more involved in the operating room committee. At some point, I was asked to serve as the chair of the operating room committee. And then from that, I was asked to serve as the chief of staff for our medical center. And none of these were, I would say, planned, but one opportunity led to others. And I'm certain that's very similar to most people's leadership journeys. And from my perspective, the question is, when a door opens, you have to decide if you want to walk through it or not. And it's okay not to walk through every door. But I think if you decide you're going to walk through, then you have to be intentional about what you're going to do and how you're going to make the most of your, in the big picture, short time in leadership.
And you brought up an interesting point there. I've heard both sides of that. Many people say, I've heard this very frequently, but be very critical of the doors you go through. Saying no is whenever it's not a good fit, da 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 da. And then other folks suggest that the door is open, you need to move through it unless you're clearly not qualified or that's not your sweet spot. And you kind of struck a middle ground there. So if folks are considering this along their leadership journey, what is your overall general advice in terms of how do we strike the balance between going through to open doors and versus saying no?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question, Doug. And I think one, it's very different for each individual. What motivates people is going to be different. We're all somewhat motivated by ego. You don't go move into jobs that have titles if you don't have some ego drive. Many of us like to make change, be involved in positive change. So it's an opportunity to be involved in positive change. Some, there are maybe financial considerations. I think there's a spectrum of reasons that people pursue leadership opportunities. My personal kind of feeling is that if you're not excited about the opportunity and understand the difficulties the opportunity brings, then you're probably not ready to accept a role. And then to the point made about if an opportunity is there, you should capitalize on it. I completely understand that. I do think that my mantra has always been, if you do a good job and you're nice to people, there will always be opportunities. And I found that that's usually the case. Now, maybe not in every opportunity in life, but it does feel like there's never a shortage of people asking you to do something if you do a good job, you're responsive, and you're generally nice to people. So that's sort of been my mindset going into leadership opportunities.
And did you succeed Dr. Stern as chair?
I did.
So that must have been quite a role to fill.
Intimidating to say the least.
Yeah, let's go into that. Tell us about that.
So I would say it was intimidating, but at the same time, highly fortunate. So for those who know Dr. Stern, he's an incredibly humble person. He is selfless, and he was those things for my entire time from the day he hired me. And he still works a little bit in the department clinically, 1 day a week seeing patients, and he comes to all the academic stuff. He, I would say, in some ways groomed me. He gave me the opportunity to serve as a division director and then later as a vice chair. He made sure I was networked in organizations like the AOA and the AOS, and always served as a sponsor for me. And because of those things, he really gave me the opportunity and helped me build the skills necessary given those opportunities and to hopefully succeed in them. Taking over for him was certainly intimidating, but again, to his credit, he was extremely humble about the transition. And he made himself available to me whenever I needed help, advice, or just a little mental support. But he also never really stepped in the way, never made a comment about a decision that I would have made publicly, never ever badmouthed me or my decision-making process, always supported me with the other partners. And I was very fortunate and blessed in that capacity because that can go the other way in a not so favorable manner. But for me, he was a pillar and a role model in terms of how to gracefully step away from leadership. And I hope to emulate that at some point in the future.
Man, we should all be that blessed. That's a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate.
So when I was in business school, we learned there's two jobs of the CEO, two prime jobs. One is strategic planning and strategic process, and the other one is succession planning to replace yourself. Yet that is a epidemic problem across every healthcare organization I've been in, is finding the successor for the strong, positive, dynamic leader. I mean, in my institution here, it is rare to find a department where there's a strong beta ready to take over if the chairperson came out. What are your thoughts and how are you developing succession planning in your department? Or is it just not even going to happen if Mike Archdeacon left Cincinnati tomorrow, that has to do an external search? How does that work?
Yeah. So again, I think you have to be intentional. And I think one of our biggest roles in a chairperson role is faculty development and career plan. And so I feel like I've learned some of those skills over the last 5, 10, 15 years, whatever. And it's very much a part of my regular meetings with faculty. So annual review and other touch bases is talking about career goals, career plan, and those kind of things. So with that as a backdrop, you start to get a sense if people are interested in leadership, and you start to see where their skills and where they really excel. And I will say in my department, I think that at present, today, there are 3 very, very solid candidates for the chair role in my department when I'm either fired, removed, retire, pass away, whatever it is that occurs that I'm no longer in this chair. I think there are 3 solid candidates. And my perspective then is it's my job to help them be the best candidate they can be. It won't be my decision. It's a dean's decision, a search committee decision. But my job is to help them be as prepared as they can be so that each one of them is the best candidate they have capacity to be. And so we're very intentional about, what assessing, one, do you have the interest? And if you do, where are your strengths and where are the skills that we need to focus on? And for some, that's working on your financial acumen. For others, it's conflict resolution and other strategic thinking or philanthropic goals, right? Like learning how to engage philanthropically with potential donors in the community, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been our sort of path in my department, is just trying to identify those who are interested, who have demonstrated the ability to lead, and then looking at what the opportunities are to help them be the best candidate possible when and if that comes up on their plate.
Yeah, but or a lot of the real important things to develop as a chair occur in the spur of the moment. You and your dyad partner, oh my gosh, this came up. How are we doing? We need to work through this. Click, 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 click. And many times the partial portion of the FTE that these folks that are vices or stepping into the role don't allow them to be in the midst of that. How do we get past? Because it's one thing to say, all right, you're the PD. So you're the vice chair in the PD. If you do a good job at running the residency, that'll mean you'll do a good job running the department, which we know is not the case. And a lot of the faculty issues that you deal with are spur of the moment, have to be done now. And that person doesn't necessarily sit in the room as you're doing it. How do you translate that leadership learning and that ability and that assessment of their acumen and their patience and their ability to deal with these crucial conversations when they're down the hallway in clinic or 2 floors down in surgery?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Doug, because you're right. There are lots of decisions that you have to make when the situation presents itself. I think there's a couple opportunities there. One is not all of them are made on the fly. Even a crucial situation doesn't necessarily have to be resolved immediately. And one of the things that I've tried to learn and be better at is that I don't always have to give an answer. Oftentimes we feel obligated to answer when asked a question or posed with a situation. Most of the time, you can buy yourself a little time. So I think that's one. And then you can engage them in one capacity or another. You can lay out the situation, get their feedback, and you may not bring them in because of privacy issues or things like that, but you can get their feedback and tell them, and then bring back to them, close the loop on how you dealt with it and how their recommendation or feedback input might have impacted the situation. I think another method in what we've incorporated in our department, and it's taken time, but we've built an executive committee in our department. And that executive committee is the constituents are the division chiefs and the vice chairs. So in our college, we can have an executive vice chair if you like. We have a vice chair of clinical, we have a vice chair of education and research, and we have a vice chair of, well, we used to have a vice chair of diversity, equity, inclusion. It's inclusive excellence. But my point is there are a number of vice chairs and a number of division chiefs, and we try very hard to bring issues to the executive committee and have the group weigh in so that many of those decisions, not all, but many of those decisions are vetted through the executive committee and then brought forward. And we've gone even a step further that a lot of the decisions are not even rendered by, in this case, the chair, me, but we'll decide that maybe the best person to bring this to the group is the vice chair of clinical and the vice chair of education. Like, rather than it coming from me all the time, we try to lay that work out and delegate it out with input from the rest of the executive committee so that it's not always one person handing out dictums and demands and things like that. It really does try to come from a leadership group. And we're not perfect. There's plenty of decisions I wish I'd have gotten more vetting on, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that that's one of the things I've learned is having a group of leaders, one, gives you a better perspective on things, and two, helps you implement things. Because when I have a team of people, in my case, the executive committee is 7. When I have a group of 7 that comes into the room and says, okay, we've talked this, we've vetted out, this is what we've decided as the executive committee, then it sells much easier to the rest of the group. And it gives those people that are likely going to be your chair candidates, or the ones that are in those vice chair, division director roles, it gives them the opportunity to see some of that leadership, how you have to think about things as well. So it's not perfect, but it gives them more than they get otherwise in some cases.
Those cadence meetings, or you just call them ad hoc?
They're cadenced.
Okay. How often do you do them?
Usually monthly. And I say usually because on occasion there's a topic that we have to address, and we'll have an ad hoc to add to the monthly cadence. And then there's occasions based on people's lives and schedules that we just can't meet one month, and we'll push it off to the next. But it's almost all, I would say it's at least 10 or 11 times a year cadenced, with usually one a year that we end up not having for various scheduling reasons.
You do them in person or by Zoom?
In person.
Okay.
With the exception that if somebody's out of town and is able to join in, we'll have them Zoom in so that they can be part of the conversation. But in general, we try to make it also social. We have food. We go to one of our houses. We rotate whose house it's at. We have food. We have a social half hour, 40 minutes before we get down to business. The executive vice chair writes the agenda, runs the meeting. I don't run the meeting. The executive vice chair runs the meeting, does the action items and the follow-up. And we try to delegate out responsibilities so that we're working as a team. And again, it's not perfect. There are times that I wish I'd have been more engaging as a group. And there are other decisions that unfortunately fall to an individual, and you just have to make the call. But it's been a good learning opportunity for me, and I think it's created a buy-in for the department.
Sounds like it. Sounds like a very good way to do it. So your meetings are about an hour or so? If you're somebody's house, it's going to be longer than that.
Yeah, they're about 2.5.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
And we try to have them, we try to cadence it such that it's a day or two before our departmental practice meeting, so we can bring follow-up items and new action items to the practice a day or two later. And that seems to work out pretty well also.
How many doctors are in your department?
Probably about 32, 33.
Okay.
Under the business side. And the academic department is closer to 50.
Got it. All right. So when you first started out, of course, you were chair. Any recollections or any lessons learned during your very first couple of years or so as chair that looking back and go, wow, if I had to do that one over again, I would have done this? Or did you hit a home run on something and say, wow, I was really proud of that? Just in the first couple of years. We'll move through your career.
There's two things that come to my mind. One is more of just an awareness. Like, I had no idea how much after hours, after work
right,
being a chair was. Like, I had no idea. Like, I thought, okay, you're going to have some recruiting calls and recruiting dinners. You're going to have grand rounds. But what you don't realize, I think, until you're in the role is there's search committees for other departments. There's evaluations for other departments. There's College of Medicine. There's philanthropic. There's all these other commitments that I had no idea would take so much of my time in the evenings, in the mornings, and on weekends that you just can't do during your regular day-to-day operations and things. So I think really understanding the commitment that it takes to do the job and what's expected of you, to me, was eye-opening. And I didn't do a very good job of it. I worked too much clinically my first 2 years, and it took me time to sort that out. Fortunately, I had a couple senior chairs who mentored me and helped me understand why, because I operated 3 days a week, and I felt like I could do this job, and it turns out I couldn't. And I think in hindsight, I wish I would have been more thoughtful about that. And then I think an area that I really wish still to this day, I wish I would have communicated better. And that's to me where I've made the biggest mistakes, is not communicating adequately. And we, like many places, we had to assess our implant vendor situation. And we were looking at, in particular, the trauma vendors. And we made the decision that I made the decision that I was going to have the divisions that use the bulk of a supplier to be the deciders on the vendors we were going to go for. So we all do hemiarthroplasties, but I was going to have the joint surgeons were the ones that were going to decide our joint vendors. We all use some of the knot tying and some of those suture anchors and things like that, but we decided the sports division. Same thing in the trauma. Everybody does some fracture work, but we decided the trauma division was going to make the decision on who our vendors were. And I still think that was the right decision. I didn't communicate that up front as clearly and as well as I should in the rationale for it. And when we made a decision on our trauma vendors, it had a huge amount of pushback, consternation, a lot of anger and dissent. Really, people felt like the rug was pulled out from under them. And I still think it was the right path. I just don't think it could have been brought forward better, could have been communicated better, the rationale, vetting it ahead of time. And I still think I would have done it the same way, but I really learned a lot from that. And that was probably 10 years ago.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's good. Your very sweet wife, Lynn, how did she respond to this increase in your afternoon, evening activity? I mean, she's very accommodative and tolerant, and she's a very special lady. How did she deal with these changes in your work life as you became chair? Any advice for that?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I think it's easy to look at our career goals and aspirations and what we get value out of. The value that I get out of the time and effort that I put into it, my wife doesn't really get that value, nor did my kids when they were living at my house and growing up. So I think understanding that, having a very clear dialogue about it, and then figuring out how, in my mind, it's not paying it back, but giving an equal credence and importance to the things that are important to her, that we make sure we prioritize. If I'm going to prioritize these things in my side of the equation, then we're going to figure out what we need to prioritize in her side of the equation. And it's not perfect. And believe me, she gives 80% and I give 20. So I'm very lucky in that regard. But I think just being committed to trying to acknowledge that even though these are my aspirations and I get personal gratification out of it, it's not that gratifying for my wife and kids, the work that I do. They're proud of me and they're supportive of me, but they don't personally get much out of the things that I achieve in my work life.
Now let's talk about your mid-career. That's before you assume these other roles outside of the department or those senior leadership roles. Anything pop to your mind during those period of time? Any lessons learned? Any advice that you give folks after you got to figure out where the meetings are, you know where you're going, people know who you are, all those things, and now you're in that mid part where you're supposed to really start, the flywheel goes and you start going. Any recollections or thoughts from that period of time?
Yeah, I have a few things that come to mind. So one is, I think there's a huge desire to offer an opinion. Like, I've worked very hard to try not to offer my opinion when it comes right up. Like, I still have a lot of work to do, but I try very hard not to offer my opinion unless my opinion is going to, one, influence the conversation. Two, I feel so strongly about it that no matter what the outcome is, I feel like it needs to be shared. And that's a hard thing to do. For me, it is to sit quietly and listen and not just speak up when it comes to mind. That's, I would say, been very intentional. I'm still not very good at it. I'm better at it than I was 20 years ago, but it's still an opportunity for growth. And then I think another one is, along those lines, is not feeling the need to respond to something immediately. We kind of touched on it before. Most circumstances have time. There aren't that many that you have to make a decision right there on the spot. And I've found and been mentored that, especially on a tough decision, give yourself as much time as you can. And if you have someone you can bounce it off of, then get as much input as you can. And that's an area where I developed some mentors that are outside my department. I had two different department chairs, 10, 15 years senior to me, that I developed relationships with, and they served as someone I could bounce ideas off because they didn't have a dog in the fight. And they could also look at it less biased than an orthopedic surgeon because it's not their business and things like that. So those are a few things that I think that I've learned, continue to work on, and I wish I would have been better at it 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. It would have probably saved me some grief.
How did you pick those mentors?
So part of it was just circumstance, and part of it was I observed qualities that I thought would be helpful, right? Like how to manage conflict, how to compose yourself in the public, how to have people listen to you, how to have influence without commanding the dialogue, right? One of the chairs I respected tremendously was the chair of otolaryngology. He had an unbelievable knack for influencing the outcome with few to minimal words. And the reason was is he was very thoughtful about what he said, and he said it usually after everyone else spoke. He would weigh in, and he didn't repeat things. And I just found that that was like really great communication and impactful. And I've tried to model it, not nearly as successfully. So part of it was just watching what I thought were good leaders. And then other parts were just circumstance, right? I just happened to operate on the same day as one of the former chairs of neurosurgery. So we'd sit in the lounge and talk. And I had aspirations, so I would talk to him and pick his brain, and he'd give me feedback. And over time, that relationship grew and evolved. And to this day, still, he's been retired for 15 years, but still serves as a great mentor for me.
Wow. How fortunate is that? Let's talk about the folks that you serve as a mentor for. How do you ever proactively start that relationship, or do you wait for folks to come to you? How does that work?
I think it works both ways. I look for opportunities where I think, me being engaged would be helpful for them. It's a little easier when you're a department chair because one of my jobs is to have regular meetings with my faculty and understand what they want to do so I can identify where I might be helpful. But even outside my department, I think one is to the best of my ability, I'm a big advocate of having kind of this, I'll talk to anybody. It may not be right now, but if someone wants to meet, I'll meet with anybody, medical student, graduate student, department chair, faculty from another department. It doesn't really matter. I'll meet with anybody. It sometimes takes a little time to get it scheduled. And I usually try to put a time limit around it, around 20 minutes, so that I can not spend it too much time. But I think one is just being available to people they really appreciate. And you get a good sense if you're going to develop a relationship, if they go down that road, then it becomes easier to be a mentor. And then I think the other way is very intentional mentoring. So I'll use the Orthopedic Trauma Association, an organization you and I are very familiar with. When having the fortunate opportunity to sit in some leadership roles, you see talented people and you know that they're going to be successful. And I've engaged and tried to build relationships with some of those people to try to look, here's some mistakes that I've made. Let's hope that my mistake can be your opportunity to learn. And most of those people have been, I would say, very interested in sort of those kind of conversations. So I think some of it's intentional, some of it's circumstantial, and some of it is someone comes to you for whatever the reason. They see something that they want to learn from you, type of thing.
Very good. All right, let's move on to the stage in your career you are now. So you're a well-respected, accomplished department chair. When you're in the meetings, people know that's Mike. He's got his act together. His department's running smoothly. And then these additional positions come on. So you have a position within the medical school, within the academic system, and then also within the physicians group, right?
Yes.
Very, very different jobs, different things. I strongly suspect that a number of our members within the AOA are confronted with this. They're either interested in those roles or they're being approached for those roles, and they're a little unsure of how to proceed with that. How do you evaluate those? How do you decide what to get into, what not to get into? Any suggestions on the application process or any of those things? What about bandwidth? Just give us your advice and your thoughts on those positions, those other things above and beyond being department chair.
Yeah, I'm going to hit on the bandwidth first because I think that's the most delicate balance. And without question, serving in my college slash practice plan leadership roles has come at a cost to my department. I have dual obligations and there's a conflict at times, and I have to balance that. Sometimes I do it okay, sometimes not as well. And I think that's one of the values of having my executive committee group is that it helps me counterbalance my other roles and responsibilities and my commitment to the department and my responsibilities for the department. So I think you have to sort out, if you're going to choose other roles, how you're going to balance your obligations. And that to me has been, I would say, my biggest struggle with some of these more senior leadership roles in the last few years. That said, how to look at the opportunity, I think it really comes down to where you think you're impactful and what you're interested in. And I, right, wrong, or indifferent, felt that I was impactful in the leadership sphere. Like I felt like that was an area where I could bring something valuable or at least positive to the table. So in our practice plan leadership role, the bylaws state that it has to be an acting chair to serve in that role. So there's a small candidate group. And when the role became available, you applied for the role. And at the time, I felt like it might be something that I could do. And I like having the ability to influence, not so much make decisions, but influence how we're going to look at things. And being amongst the group of chair peers, the influence was more so than in my department, which was super fulfilling. But instead of 30 to 40 people, now it's 1,500. And that's, from my eyes, I could make some impactful, I could have part of impactful decisions and help look at impactful decisions that go beyond my day-to-day lens.
How'd you evaluate? So they're two very different roles, right? I mean, the physician group role is different from your university, your school level.
Well, they are and they're not. They have different responsibilities, but they're actually coexistent roles. So if the senior associate dean also serves as the practice CEO, they kind of go together. And then on one side, you serve as the university's lead for the clinical practice and recruitment and things like that. And on the other hand, it's the liaison to the health system and how the physician, we lease our physicians to the health system and how the physician practice is going to incorporate into the health system. So the two roles are different in their responsibilities, but they overlap, that having a single person is probably not a bad way of doing it. That's obviously a biased opinion.
So how do you evaluate yourself to know if that's the position for you, or is there any thoughts into that? Did you guys do any formal processes where you did any personality or any other types of inventories, or
Yes.
just through your mentors or your friends saying, "Hey, Mike, you'd be really good for that"? How did that work?
Yeah, I would say both with these roles and with just my own personal leadership skill development. So I think personally, I've had a professional coach for probably 12 years, and that was very helpful, mainly to have someone to bounce things off of outside of my profession. And secondly, someone who could really assess what my strengths and opportunities were. And we did formal things like a Hogan assessment and things like that, developing a plan, how I'm going to improve my leadership skills, what are the areas I need to work on. So that was sort of the extrinsic. And then internally, for the particular role, the CEO role, there was an interview process. We didn't actually do a formal assessment, but the chairs had assessment. So knowing that it had to come from a chair, that assessment had already been done. So some of that leadership assessment, again, using a Hogan inventory system, as well as Myers-Briggs, which I think is maybe fallen by the wayside a little bit in terms of how people evaluate. But some of those tools are used not infrequently in our university. And then again, extrinsically, having someone that I intentionally engaged to help understand the opportunities I have to work on, as well as the things that I could leverage as strengths.
Does the university cover that cost, or do you pay for it?
That one's out of my pocket.
So you and Lynn just talked about it and said, "Hey, I need this," and Lynn was like, "Sure, go ahead," and that was that.
It was more or less like that. I think the way I look at it is an investment in your career. And
Right.
I think people look at price tags for that kind of work and they're like, "Oh, $25,000 a year, that's a lot of money." And it is, don't get me wrong. But I think when you look at what we do and how we're compensated and what you get out of those kind of things, if it's important enough, it feels like it's a good investment. And most of those engagements, in my experience, it's pretty high up for that first year. The ongoing dialogue is much less because you're not going through continued assessments and things like that. It's more of a cadence of conversations. So the cost up front is pretty high. The maintenance cost is more reasonable. It's still expensive, but it's more reasonable.
Now, you have a substantial amount of credibility professionally across the country. You and I served extensively on the OTA board together. We know each other very well. And a large portion of that credibility is the fact that you continue to put scrubs on, wash your hands, and operate. If you go up really much higher at all in the university at Cincinnati there, you're probably not going to be taking call anywhere. You're probably not going to be operating. You're going to just be a full-time suit. Thoughts on that? How do you make that? Have you considered that decision? Have you thought, would I ever give up being a clinical physician and just saying I used to do this, but now my full-time role is administrative? Have you considered that at all?
Yeah, actually, I have. I'm at a point where I think I'm getting towards the end of my chair tenure in the next few years, probably. And what are my next steps? And I've thought about just exactly as you phrased it. Would I be interested in another tier of administrative role, whether it be in a health system or a college? Or what are the alternatives? And I think for me, like I find a tremendous amount of joy from taking care of patients. I really like that. It's interesting that that's the least stressful environment I work in is the operating room. As a trauma surgeon, I think that's kind of
Yeah,
funny. Literally,
that is
people's
funny.
lives are in your hands.
Right,
It's
right.
less stressful than the meetings that I go to, which I find ironic. But I think for me at this point, we've talked about it. Lynn and I have had the conversation that I think in a few years, probably somewhere between 2 and 4, depending a little bit on the department, the dean, where we're at, et cetera, a few goals that I want to try to accomplish. I think my current plan is to probably transition out of leadership and pick up clinical practice, maybe not at 100%, but like 80%, right? Like maybe I go back to doing operating 2 to 3 days a week and seeing patients a full day a week and then do a day a week not working. That's sort of the current thought. And I mean, I guess anything can change, but that's sort of where we're at because I don't know that I want to give up clinical practice. I like it a lot. It's very fulfilling. And like you, before this more recent spin, I've been in the same environment for almost 25 years. And I get to see a lot of people. I just operated on a patient yesterday that I took care of 17 years ago.
Wow.
It's really neat and it's fun and I like it a lot. And so that's my current thoughts, but I agree with you. I think like one more tier, whatever it might be, if you want to be a formal in the C-suite or a real like a dean or executive vice president of health affairs or provost or something like that, I think it becomes almost impossible to maintain clinical practice. And that's purposely the reason that I've not wanted to give that up. And I think even now I wrestle with it at times. Like I make it difficult for everyone to do clinical work around me because of my other commitments. So the residents are like, I'm like, guys, I can't start till 8 o'clock today. I got to leave conference because I got to go to this meeting. So I make it difficult on everyone else around me. I like to think it maybe helps my department. I don't know. My department may not feel that way.
Right. I know exactly how you feel on that, and I'm sure many people listening do as well. I'm sure you just hit a lot of heartstrings on that one. All right, so let's roll this thing up with knowing when to step down, which you kind of talked into. So our friend Mark Swinkowski has that hard and fast 10-year rule, both on him being chair and then also on him being editor for JBJS. He said it for 10 years, told everybody, I've heard Mark say this story many times where he told everybody going in, it's 10 years. Y'all better start getting ready to replace me because I am out at 10. And everybody thought he was kidding. And then he got there and it's like, no, I'm done. And that's how it goes there. And then we know other folks that stay in way over their expiration date. How do you assess this was a good run? It's time for me to get out of the way, let somebody else do this. How do you figure that one out?
I don't know that I have the answer, one, because I'm not there yet, but I'm certainly thinking about it, but I can tell you where my thoughts are. So one is I understand Mark's role of 10 years. I think it took me almost 10 years to build a structure that I think is now fairly effective. So that took some time. And I almost feel like I would have been abandoning my commitment if I would have jumped out of 10 years. Now, more likely, Mark is much more efficient and better at building things than I am, and he did it faster than me. And it took me 10 years. But then, honestly, I think for me, at this point, it's goal oriented. I have a couple of goals that I want to try to achieve before I step down. And I articulated those goals a while ago, and I had an idea how long it would take me to achieve them. And I'd like to try to bring those things to fruition. That said, I think right around this, like I said, a couple years, 2 to 3 years, I think if in 2 to 3 years, if I have not achieved those goals, I think the logical question is what makes anyone think I'm going to achieve them in 2 more years or 3 more years or 5 more years? So I've set these couple of goals or what I'd like to achieve. But if I don't get them done in 2 to 3 years, then I think it's time. I feel pretty strongly that I don't want to be complacent. I want new energy, new ideas, and I don't want to stay in a role because it's working. I want us to be dynamic. But I think if I can achieve those goals, it puts the department in a better place for the next chair. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about it. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's sort of my mindset.
I'm not going to ask one more question. I'm not going to ask you if water's wet and the sky's blue because we know the truth. We know the obvious things. But on the not so obvious things, is there any skill set or anything that you learned or developed as department chair that enabled you to be a better leader within the Orthopedic Trauma Association, within the AOA? You were on the board of counselors for Ohio and the BOC, correct? You've served in a number of organizations. Were there things that you picked up? Obviously, not the obvious, simple, silly answers that we all know the answer to, but something that's a little unique or, I wouldn't have thought of that had come up that when you were OTA president or and you were Ohio president too? Yeah. That kind of helped you in that capacity.
Yeah, I don't know that it's unique to me, but the thing that keeps resonating for me and I struggle with and continue to try to work on is humility. Just learning that I'm one, not always right. I'm rarely right. Two, that the group will almost always have a better decision than the individual,
Right.
and that learning to respect and understand other opinions. Because, like a lot of people, I feel like I see it very clearly, and clearly I don't. So learning the humility to be wrong, to acknowledge being wrong, to be open to other people's opinion, having group decision, those kind of things have something that I've had to work on and continue to work on. But I think to me, that's been one of the most valuable skills that I've tried to work on, and it's paid dividend where I've been successful with it.
Wow, that's fantastic. What a great way to end this. This has been an absolute pleasure talking with my friend and colleague, Dr. Mike Archdeacon, who is well known for his work in pelvic and acetabular trauma and trauma in general. Overall, served extremely high levels within our organization, serving as president of the Trauma Association and other locations as well. And then also very high roles within the University of Cincinnati. Mike, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Doug. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love the AOA supporting these leadership things. There's so much to learn from our peers and colleagues, and it's really a pleasure to be part of it and humbling.
Yes, sir. And y'all stay tuned for future podcasts on this podcast channel within the American Orthopedic Association.